In the biting cold of a North Atlantic dawn, a longship cut through the mist like a blade through silk. Its carved dragon prow stared fiercely toward an unseen shore. Behind it, a crew of hardened Norsemen rowed in rhythmic silence, eyes fixed on the endless grey horizon. They were chasing whispers, tales of a land beyond the sea, where grapes grew wild and forests stretched unbroken. It was not myth to them, it was Vinland, a place that promised a new beginning, or a haunting end. Little did they know, their voyage would carve one of history's greatest mysteries, a settlement that flourished briefly and then vanished as though swallowed by the earth itself. Centuries before Columbus ever set sail, the Vikings were already masters of the seas. From the fjords of Norway to the windswept shores of Iceland, and the green meadows of Greenland, their longships carried them farther than any Europeans before them. By the late 10th century, Norse explorers were restless, driven by hunger, ambition, and exile. One such man was Eric the Red, a fiery outlaw who founded settlements in Greenland after being banished from Iceland for murder. But it was his son, Leif Erikson, who would make history. Leif had heard stories from sailors, tales of a mysterious western land spotted by accident. Tempted by curiosity and fortune, he set sail across unknown waters, seeking a place beyond imagination. In the year 1000 AD, Leif Erikson and his crew left Greenland in a sturdy longship. With the stars as their compass and courage as their guide, they battled waves, fog, and freezing winds. For weeks, the sea offered nothing but silence and salt. Then, as if conjured by legend, they spotted land. First, a rocky, barren coast, which they called Helgeland, Stone Land. Next, a forested place rich in timber, Markland, Forest Land. Finally, they reached a lush, temperate region unlike anything they'd ever seen. Wild grapes, meadows, and rivers full of fish. They called it Vinland, Wine Land. It was paradise by Norse standards, fertile soil, game to hunt, wood to build, and waters that teemed with life. Leif and his men built houses, gathered resources, and wintered there, marking the first known European presence in North America, 500 years before Columbus. Vinland offered everything the harsh Arctic settlements of Greenland lacked. The climate was gentler, the forests abundant, and the land seemed ready for a thriving colony. For the Norse, who struggled with the brutal isolation of Greenland, Vinland felt like a second chance. When Leif returned to Greenland, he brought back glowing tales of fertile lands and mild winters. His discovery sparked hope and ambition among other Norse chieftains. Soon, more expeditions were planned, led by figures like Thorvald Eriksson and Thorfinn Karlsefni, who sought to establish permanent settlements and bring livestock, tools, and families. In 1004 AD, Thorfinn Karlsefni, a wealthy merchant and explorer, set sail with 3 ships, over 160 settlers, and livestock, an entire community ready to build a new world. They followed Leif's route, finally landing in Vinland and constructing a settlement historians now believe to be Elant's auxiliary meadows in modern Newfoundland, Canada. They built sturdy houses from sodden timber, erected fences, and planted crops. The settlers fished, hunted, and harvested grapes. For a brief time, Vinland seemed destined to thrive, a new Norse outpost on foreign soil. But paradise would not last. The Norse were not alone. Soon, they encountered the Skraelings, the indigenous peoples of North America, possibly ancestors of the Beothuk or Mi'kmaq tribes. At first, trade seemed possible. The Norse exchanged red cloth and iron tools for furs and pelts. But mistrust brewed quickly. Misunderstandings turned to tension. Tension turned to fear. One night, a skirmish erupted. Arrows flew, axes swung. Blood was spilled on Vinland soil. The settlers, though armed, were vastly outnumbered. They realized the truth. This was not an empty land. And they were not welcome. Vinland was rich. But it was isolated. Supplies from Greenland were scarce, the ocean perilous, and winters unpredictable. The settlers began to question the dream. Was it worth defending a distant land against unknown enemies? The colony's leaders debated fiercely: stay and fight, or return and survive? Slowly, the promise of Vinland began to fade. After 3 hard years, Thorfinn Karlsefni made a fateful decision. He gathered his people, dismantled their homes, and sailed back to Greenland. The settlers left behind traces: iron nails, tools, and burned hearths, but no lasting colony. Yet rumors persisted that some stayed, a few families or outcasts who refused to abandon Vinland's beauty. If they did, their fate remains unknown. By the 11th century, the Norse turned their attention back to Greenland and Iceland. Vinland became a legend, a land whispered in sagas, half history, half myth. But the echoes of those longships still ripple through time, a haunting reminder that the first Europeans in North America came not to conquer, but to survive. And then, one day, they were gone. Imagine a place where forests stretch endlessly, rivers gleam with silver fish, and meadows bloom with unknown flowers, yet every night, you sleep with one eye open, unsure if the next dawn will bring peace or arrows. For the Norse settlers of Vinland, this paradise was also a prison, rich, wild, and perilous. They had crossed an ocean for a better life. But in the heart of the new world, they discovered that survival demanded more than courage. It demanded unity, wisdom, but luck they did not have. When Thorfinn Karlsefni and his settlers first set foot on Vinland's fertile shores, their hearts were full of hope. The land promised abundance: towering trees for building, rivers teeming with salmon, soil soft and dark, ready for crops. They built sod houses, similar to those in Greenland and Iceland, thick-walled shelters that held heat through cold nights. A longhouse stood at the center, serving as a communal hall for feasts, meetings, and storytelling. Life in Vinland began with optimism. The settlers planted barley and wheat, raised cattle and goats, and fished daily. Wild grapes hung heavy from vines, a sign, they believed, of divine favor. For the first time in years, many felt free from Greenland's ice and famine. But paradise was not without its price. Vinland was generous, but unforgiving. The settlers soon learned that the seasons here were unpredictable. One year, warm breezes and gentle rains. The next, bitter storms and biting frost. Familiar crops struggled to grow, wild animals were plentiful, yet difficult to hunt in the dense forests. Strange diseases, fevers and rashes unknown in Greenland, struck the camp. And deeper still, a silent strain tore at the colony: division. Among the settlers were warriors, farmers, merchants, and women, each with different visions of what Vinland should be. Some wanted to expand inland. Others wanted to return home before the sea froze. Thorfinn, though wise, could not unite all voices. In the heart of this paradise, human pride became a quiet enemy. The first contact with the Skrælings, native peoples of Vinland, began peacefully. The Norse offered red woolen cloth, shiny trinkets, and metal knives. The Skrælings, intrigued by these strange newcomers, traded furs, pelts, and food in return. But mistrust simmered beneath the surface. The Norse, accustomed to dominance, saw the Skrælings as simple folk, while the Skrælings viewed the pale strangers as intruders. Then came the incident. One saga tells of a bull, frightened by the Skrælings, charging through the camp and scattering them. Panic turned to fury. Days later, the Skrælings returned, not to trade, but to fight. A sudden attack shattered the settlement's fragile peace. Arrows rained from the forests. Norse shields rose in defense. The settlers fought bravely, but they were outnumbered. Women and children fled to the ships as warriors struggled to hold the line. When the smoke cleared, several Norse lay dead. The survivors gathered in silence, realizing the truth: Vinland was not theirs. The settlers were trespassers in a land already claimed, and now they had enemies who would not forget. After the attack, Vinland's promise darkened. The settlers rebuilt their defenses. But fear seeped into every corner. Men refused to hunt alone. Women whispered of spirits in the woods. At night, distant drums echoed from the trees, or perhaps it was only the wind. Worse still, no ships arrived from Greenland. The settlers were cut off, a tiny island of strangers in an endless wilderness. The sagas tell of restless dreams, of explorers wandering inland and never returning, of strange fires flickering on distant hills. Some began to believe the land itself resisted them, that Vinland was alive, and wanted them gone. Supplies dwindled. Arguments turned violent. Some wanted to pack up and sail back before the sea iced over. Others, unwilling to abandon their labor, insisted on staying. Thorfinn tried to mediate. But authority meant little when hunger and fear ruled the heart. In one grim winter, the settlers faced their harshest trial. Game became scarce, the weather turned cruel, and sickness spread through the camp. Graves multiplied in the frozen earth. Hope, once blazing, now flickered faintly, like the last embers in a dying hearth. The land of plenty had become a land of ghosts. When the thaw came, Thorfinn made a solemn decision. Vinland is fair and wide, he said, but it is not for us. The settlers packed what they could, loaded their longships, and looked back one last time. The houses stood silent, the fields empty, the shore still. The dream of a Norse America, bold and brief, ended there. But did they all leave? Some sagas hint that a few remained, stubborn, exiled, or bound by love for the land. If they stayed, no word of them ever reached Greenland again. And centuries later, when explorers sought traces of Vinland, they found only ruins and questions. At first, it was only whispers, faint voices on the wind, shapes moving between the trees, the feeling of being watched from the shadows. But soon, the whispers grew louder, the shapes drew nearer. And the settlers of Vinland realized they were no longer alone, not in body, nor in spirit. Something unseen had awakened in the woods. And the new world, once a land of promise, was turning into a realm of dread. After the first clash with the Skraelings, unease settled like fog over the Vinland settlement. Each dawn brought a heavy silence. No birdsong, no breeze, only the creaking of trees and the murmur of uneasy hearts. Hunters returned pale and shaken, claiming they'd heard laughter echoing through the forest. Not human, not close, yet unmistakable. One man swore he saw a figure, cloaked in animal hides, eyes gleaming with light, watching from the tree line before vanishing without a sound. The Norse were a superstitious people. They spoke of land spirits, Draga, and wights, beings tied to places and fate. To them, Vinland was no longer merely foreign, it was haunted. To find better ground and perhaps friendlier tribes, Thorfinn sent out scouts, skilled men armed with axes, shields, and courage. Days passed. Then weeks. They never returned. A search party followed their trail through tangled forests and across icy streams. They found no bodies, no weapons, only footprints that ended abruptly in soft earth, as though the forest itself had swallowed them. From then on, no one ventured far from camp. At night, the settlers lit great fires and gathered close, whispering prayers to Odin and Christ alike. The woods beyond the flames seemed to breathe, alive with unseen movement. One morning, a farmer tending livestock discovered strange carvings on nearby trees, spirals, claws, and symbols no Norse hand had made. Some resembled faces, others, runes twisted into alien forms. The settlers tried to laugh it off. But the fear was real. Had the Skraelings left them as warnings? Or were they signs of something older, something born from the land itself? Thorfinn ordered the carvings cut down and burned. But that night, new ones appeared, closer, deeper, carved into the very wood of their longhouse door. Soon, the settlers began to dream, vivid, unsettling visions. In one dream, Gudrid, Thorfinn's wife, saw a woman with pale hair and hollow eyes standing in the doorway, whispering, "The land remembers." In another, warriors saw their dead comrades beckoning them into the forest. Some awoke screaming. Others woke in silence, and by dawn, walked into the woods and were never seen again. Desperation grew. The settlers performed ancient rituals from their pagan past, offerings of bread, iron, and blood, even as they prayed to Christ for deliverance. But neither gods nor saints answered. When the Skraelings reappeared, it was not to trade or talk. They came silently, like shadows, encircling the camp at dusk. Their faces were painted with ash and red ochre, their weapons gleaming. The Norse gathered in the longhouse, ready to fight. But the attack never came. Instead, the Skraelings stood at the edge of the forest, chanting in a low, mournful rhythm, then disappeared once more into the trees. Some settlers believed it was a warning, "Leave before the land takes you." Others feared it was a curse. That night, the livestock were found dead, throats slit, eyes open, bodies untouched. No tracks led away. The fear became unbearable. Even the bravest warriors refused to leave the palisade. Food ran low. Children cried at every rustle. The woods seemed alive, whispering, watching, waiting. Thorfinn gathered the survivors and spoke, "We are strangers here. The land does not welcome us. If we remain, we will perish." No one argued. They began preparations to leave Vinland behind. But even as they packed, the settlers looked to the forest and saw figures standing between the trees, silent, unmoving, like sentinels of another world. By dawn, the Norse boarded their ships. As the coastline faded behind them, a mist rose over the land, swallowing the abandoned houses, the carved trees, and the graves of those left behind. Vinland, once a dream of plenty, was now a memory of fear. Before setting sail, Thorfinn looked back one final time. He thought he saw smoke curling from the longhouse chimney, though no one remained. Some claimed they heard singing on the wind, soft and sorrowful, in a tongue none could name. The settlers left in silence, their hearts heavy, their eyes haunted. Behind them, Vinland fell quiet, the woods closing over their footprints, the whispers fading into legend. When the Norse ships vanished beyond the fog, Vinland sank into silence. No messenger returned. No saga recorded their fate in full. Only fragments remained, tales of courage, whispers of fear, and ruins swallowed by time. For centuries, historians searched for answers. How could a colony, rich in resources and filled with brave settlers, simply disappear? The truth of Vinland's end lies somewhere between history and myth, scattered across sagas, scars in the soil, and the restless echoes of a dream undone. Years after the final departure, rumors spread through Greenland. Some said Thorfinn's ships returned half empty, others claimed none returned at all. Fishermen whispered of ghostly longships drifting near the horizon, sails torn, crew unseen. When later expeditions tried to retrace their path, they found nothing. No signs of life. No smoke rising from hearths. Only silent ruins, the skeletons of longhouses, tools left to rust, and graves without names. Nature had reclaimed Vinland. The forest crept over fences. The ocean gnawed at the shore. The land erased its brief invaders, leaving behind only echoes. The disappearance of Vinland settlers remains one of the earliest mysteries in American history. Three main theories emerged across the centuries. 1. Conflict and extermination. Some believe the Skraelings, the native peoples, finally struck back, destroying the Norse settlement in a decisive raid. Outnumbered and isolated, the settlers could not defend themselves. If true, their bones may still lie beneath the forest floor, buried in unmarked earth. 2. Abandonment and retreat. Others argue the settlers simply gave up. Fearing the land, the isolation, and the hostile natives, they returned to Greenland or Iceland, leaving behind anything too heavy to carry. But sagas hint that not all left. Some may have remained, a handful of families, determined or desperate, swallowed by the wild. 3. Assimilation or absorption. A more romantic theory suggests some Norse joined the native tribes. Over generations, their language, culture, and faces faded into the fabric of local peoples, leaving no trace but legend. Each theory carries fragments of truth. None can fully explain the silence. The Norse sagas, the saga of Eric the Red and the saga of the Greenlanders, offer the only written memories of Vinland. But they are contradictory, part myth, part memory. One tells of Leif's discovery, another of Thorfinn's failed colony. Both end abruptly, as if the scribes themselves could not bear to write the truth. What if the story was intentionally buried? A failed colony meant dishonor, loss, and shame, unworthy of heroic saga. And so, perhaps, Vinland was written out of history. For 800 years, the New World's first European settlers were forgotten. Then, in 1960, two explorers, Helga Ingstad and Stein Ingstad, made a discovery that changed everything. On the northern tip of Newfoundland, at a place called Elance Auxiliary Meadows, they uncovered Norse-style ruins. Sod houses, iron nails, and smithy tools identical to those used in Greenland. Radiocarbon dating confirmed it, 11th century AD. Vinland was real. But even here, the mystery deepened. The site was small, not enough for the population described in sagas. Was it a base camp, a supply station, or the last refuge of a dying colony? No graves, no signs of battle, only abandonment. Archaeologists believe the final days of Vinland were not marked by war, but weariness. The settlers, trapped between fear and isolation, simply decided to leave. They dismantled what they could, boarded their ships, and sailed back across the Atlantic, some to Greenland, others perhaps lost to storms. For those who stayed behind, their fate was darker, a slow death by hunger or cold violence from neighboring tribes or quiet assimilation, their Norse names fading into new tongues. Whatever happened, one truth remains. By the dawn of the 12th century, Vinland was gone. The fires went out. The voices fell silent. And the forest closed over all. For centuries, historians credited Columbus with the discovery of America. Only recently did the world remember those who came before, Leif Erikson, Thorfinn Karlsefni, and the nameless men, women, and children who dreamed of a new home across the sea. Their colony may have failed, but their courage lit a path others would one day follow. In the silence of Vinland's ruins, we hear not failure, but the heartbeat of humanity's endless search for new horizons. For centuries, Vinland lived only in whispers, a half-forgotten story told by firelight, dismissed by scholars as a Viking dream. But in the 20th century, the earth itself began to speak. Buried beneath moss and stone lay proof that the sagas had told the truth, and perhaps even more than they dared to reveal. Now, archaeologists, historians, and storytellers have joined forces to answer the question that still haunts the North Atlantic. What really happened to the settlers of Vinland? In 1960, Norwegian explorer Helga Ingstad and his wife, archaeologist Stein Ingstad, followed clues hidden in the sagas. Leif Erikson's Vinland was said to be a land of wild grapes and soft winters, somewhere west of Greenland. Locals in northern Newfoundland pointed them to Elant's auxiliary meadows, a grassy ridge above a windswept bay. There, buried beneath centuries of soil, the Ingstads uncovered sod longhouses with Norse architecture, iron nails, and a forge used to repair ships, a bronze cloak pin, identical to those worn in Greenland cooking pits, charcoal, and tools. Radiocarbon dating placed the site around 1000 AD, matching the timeline of the sagas exactly. The discovery shocked historians. The Vikings had reached North America 500 years before Columbus. Yet, the site held more questions than answers. No signs of long-term settlement. No graves. No artifacts from later centuries. The Norse had come, lived briefly, and vanished. Over the decades, researchers uncovered more hints. Norse-style iron nails found in main stone carvings in Baffin Island resembling Viking tools, stories among some Inuit tribes of pale-skinned visitors from across the sea, and in Minnesota, the controversial Kensington runestone, carved with runic inscriptions. Though its authenticity remains fiercely debated, each clue suggests that the Norse may have explored farther than historians once believed. Perhaps as far south as New England. But none reveal the settlers' fate. Modern archaeology uses cutting-edge tools to unravel ancient puzzles. Ground-penetrating radar scans beneath forest floors for hidden structures, DNA analysis searches for Norse ancestry in modern native populations, pollen and soil samples reveal crops the settlers may have grown. Dendrochronology, tree-ring dating, pinpoints exact years of habitation. One breakthrough came from butternut shells found at Elant's auxiliary meadows, a tree that only grows south of Newfoundland. This proves the Norse traveled farther inland, gathering resources before returning to their coastal base. But even with science, the final chapter of Vinland remains unwritten. In Greenlandic lore, there are tales of ghost ships seen drifting westward, their sails tattered, their decks empty. Some native oral traditions speak of tall strangers with metal weapons who came from the sea, stayed for a time, then disappeared into the woods. In Icelandic sagas, Vinland is portrayed both as a paradise and a cursed place, rich in bounty, yet hostile to settlers. Perhaps both were true. And so, legend and history intertwine, a reminder that the past is never silent, only waiting to be heard. Though the colony failed, Vinland's story reshaped our understanding of exploration. It proves that Europeans reached North America centuries before Columbus. It shows the limits of ambition, courage undone by distance and fear. And it reminds us that history is fragile, easily lost if not written, remembered, or unearthed. Today, Elant's auxiliary meadows is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a monument not to conquest, or to curiosity. Visitors walk among reconstructed longhouses, gaze at the northern sea, and imagine the voices of settlers who dared to cross an ocean. Their homes may have crumbled, but their story endures, a whisper carried across 1,000 years. Even now, explorers continue to seek new Vinlands, hidden camps, forgotten graves, and traces of Norse journeys deep into the New World. Perhaps one day, a farmer's plow or a scientist's scan will uncover a final clue, a message left behind, a skeleton with Norse jewelry, or a runestone carved with a farewell. Until then, Vinland remains what it has always been, a dream on the edge of the world, a land both found and lost. Epilogue: the sea remembers stand on the cliffs of Newfoundland. And you can still hear it, the roar of the Atlantic, the creak of invisible oars, the whisper of wind through ghostly sails. The settlers are gone, their fires cold, their names forgotten. But the sea remembers. And in its endless song, the story of Vinland lives on.